Yo, what's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to Acquire and Operate. For the love of the game, of course, this is Kale back with you, and we are picking things up this week. I'm riding solo. It's a Musings cut, and today the headline here is Don't Sleep on Cold Outbound to Grow a Micro SaaS. It's a little spicy, and in terms of table of contents, we're going to start with a brief overview of SaaS growth strategies. And I'm going to do my best to avoid death by acronyms, or at least kind of introduce the acronyms and the concepts so that it's not a PLG, CAC, LTV, ARR bloodbath. And it's easy enough to follow. But we're going to start with a brief overview of SaaS growth strategies, really just kind of some context here. And then we'll talk evolution, realities, and limitations of those growth strategies. And then we're going to step back and kind of challenge a lot of those conventional assumptions, and mainly because of our context, right? We're not operating in conventional SaaS. We're micro SaaS, which are much smaller entities going after niche markets. You know the drill there. And then we'll wrap with misconceptions about sales-led tactics and kind of the case for cold outbound as something that's very, very interesting for micro SaaS founders and for all of us as we look to grow these companies. So, all right, a brief overview of SaaS growth strategies. So, sales-led growth, direct sales is probably pretty clear and pretty well understood by everybody. But this is where you have salespeople that call prospects, understand their pain points, align their pain points with whatever their tool is, and then sell the software. And so this was obviously kind of the starting point for SaaS firms at inception. So if you're thinking Oracle, Salesforce, I mean, these groups, ADP, where I started my career, these groups have just armies of salespeople that are banging the phones, sending emails, going to demos, doing presentations, doing, relationship building, networking with, different channel partners, et cetera. And this was really kind of the starting point of any kind of organization, but SaaS in particular. And so we're going to call this sales-led growth, SLG. And it's effective, no doubt about it. It's just it's just get humans out there canvassing the market, and you're going to sell something eventually. The shortcomings, though, are that it really kind of scales linearly, or there's an old adage that, if you need to generate a certain number of bookings, AKA revenue, you basically just need to hire people and assign that number of quota. So if you want to sell $1 million, you need 3 AEs doing 350K or with 350K quotas. So it scales linearly, and meaning more heads, more revenue. And the unfortunate bit about that is that the costs scale linearly, right? So if you want to grow, if you want 500K in bookings, you need 500K in quota, which means you need to hire another account executive. And we like linear growth. We don't like linear growth. We like nonlinear growth, and we like a fixed cost basis. So lots to be, wanted as it relates to the sales-led growth strategy. So then came the rise of what is, you've probably heard PLG, which is product-led growth. And just think about it this way, where all you have to do is acquire the user, and then as a function of the product, it kind of grows itself. So the user has to share it with other potential users. So think DocuSign. Hey, here's a document to sign digitally. And they're like, oh, wow, I'm participating in this product now. This is handy. I'm going to use it. And so there's kind of baked in virality to the product. Slack is another one. These are like the very cliche examples. But then it was like, whoa, we don't need a sales team at all. The product, we just need the product to grow itself. And so PLG, and that is very nonlinear growth. So that's where you just get explosive bananas growth. And so everybody started to really, really fixate on PLG. And the challenge is that a SaaS product that has that kind of virality baked into it naturally, where to use the product, you have to pull in other parties or you have to pull in your different team members, is extremely rare. And the other thing that's related to PLG, I guess in contrast with sales-led growth with SLG, is that what PLG is very kind of experiment driven. So it's like, hey, we're going to tweak the product a little bit this way, and then let's see what happens. And those experiments take time, and there's a lot of data analysis involved. Whereas with sales-led growth, it's like hire more salespeople, make more cold calls, send more emails. We will probably, sell more. So it's a little bit more cause and effect, input, output. Whereas PLG is very scientific method, and those things take time just naturally. There's no short circuit. There's no cheat code. You need to execute experiments and see if things improve. So super rare that the product itself is kind of conducive to PLG, and that stuff takes time. And that's where you kind of get like flat growth curves. They're figuring it out, and then boom, they just rip. But you got to hang in there, and it's a tough ride when it's flat and you're not seeing much. So these things, and they didn't really happen sequentially. Kind of PLG, like sales-led growth was the name of the game for the vast majority of the SaaS kind of era. And then PLG landed, and it was considered like this new wave that this is what it was going to be, that there was no longer going to be a sales role, etc. And then product-led sales, PLS, and I know the acronyms are brutal here. So we've got sales-led growth, product-led growth, and then all of a sudden there's product-led sales. So what does this mean? So this means that you kind of weave the two together, where the objective is to get a prospective user, a prospective account into the product, and then let them experience the value of the product firsthand. So in sales-led growth, right, you're doing demos, maybe you're doing proof of concepts, but the user isn't in there eating the product and using it and being like, wow, this is really making a big difference. So product-led sales is get them in the product. Let's observe their behavior within the product, because now you have all this new surface area to measure. Let's observe their behavior in the product. If we see them do these few things, we know that they're qualified. If they start to achieve these outcomes, we know that they're going to perceive the value. And when we hit that point, let's have sales come in, human sales, to do their thing, execute a sales process and convert these kind of what are, and I'll spare you all the marketing terminology, but like product qualified leads. There's a lot of different PQL, like there's a whole bunch of stuff. So that was kind of the best of both worlds. And I guess what's important to note is that nowadays, I think it's pretty commonly embraced that it's very rarely one or the other, right? It's not like sales-led growth or product-led growth. It's some kind of cohesion of the two, or it's a thoughtful sequencing where it's like, hey, we're going to start with PLG to, this kind of persona or this ideal customer profile, and we're going to build a groundswell, and then we're going to layer in top-down sales-led growth. And most commonly, that's a function of the market segment. So it's like PLG is really good for small and mid-sized businesses, right? It's small teams. They can make decisions quickly. They can onboard themselves. For the bigger enterprises, that's where we'll utilize a sales-led growth tactic. So these things are complementary. They're used in parallel, or they're very thoughtfully sequenced. Okay. So now into evolution, realities, and limitations. So I've spoken a little bit about like the having an embedded kind of viral growth component in the product is so rare. Like very rare. Like, and I think if you come across a product like that in Micro SaaS, you got to jump out of your seat, and it can very likely command a very high premium because they're so capital efficient, right? You don't have to invest in growth. You just invest in product, which you have to do anyway, but you don't need to spend nearly as much on marketing. You don't need to spend nearly as much on labor, mainly in this context around sales, hires, et cetera. So it's kind of the holy grail. With that, so let's transition. So I think we've pretty well established that it's very rare that these kind of totally PLG conducive products are out there. And obviously that speaks to, as a product manager with your product manager hat on, you want to be thinking, okay, what tweaks can we make to the product such that it's more shareable, such that there are viral components? Like you want that to be, and that's kind of like the intersection of growth, product, and sales is becoming increasingly blurred. So growth managers, I guess put another way, growth managers are increasingly touching product. Product managers are increasingly thinking about growth tactics. So there's kind of this convergence that's occurring. I'd spoken about some of the limitations around product-led growth, but it's mainly that there's like an inescapable observation period when you're executing growth experiments that are a function of product usage. So I always joke that it's like, hey, if you're trying to sell a house, it's like, all right, let's move the front door and see if more people show up to the open house. And it's like, well, we've got 2 open houses, so it's going to take in the next 2 weekends. We're not going to know anything for a month, and then we're not sure if that's statistically significant. We need this many people to actually show up to the open house to tell if moving the door made a difference. That's the kind of environment that you're in, and you just got to watch. You got to wait and watch and sit on your hands, and that can be a little bit challenging. And with product-led sales, I think that this is just suggests that you want to be mindful of the context, because I think a lot of people were like, ugh, sales-led growth is a thing of the past. It's too costly. Let's go super hard at PLG. And it's like, yeah, but your product doesn't really translate well to PLG. So don't hang your hat on that. And that's where PLS came out. And I think if you're going to kind of use one overarching framework. It's probably product-led sales, where it's like, how do we get people in the product so they're perceiving value? We can have way more surface area to measure what they're up to. We can find patterns, and then let's increase the kind of operating leverage of our salespeople by introducing them and having them only spend their time on highly qualified, highly engaged, the folks that understand the value of the product, et cetera. So that's a little bit of the best of all worlds. All right, so now let's shift gears and just kind of challenge what are, I would say, conventional assumptions that have kind of resolved over or established themselves over the last 3 to 5 years. And the first one is that, like, in Micro SaaS, we're not going after huge TAMs. And it's not a situation where it's like, holy shit, we're competing for this market. We need to spend whatever we can to acquire market share, because we know once we acquire those users, they're going to stay with us for 10 years. And it's a sticky product, and we're going to make our money back and then some. And this is going to be just a cash printing machine. Let's spend whatever we have to acquire customers. And that implies that there's a big TAM. And there's a lot of implications there, but the first is that there's a massive market. So in those contexts, it's like, let's scale a sales team as fast as humanly possible and try to acquire. It's a race. It's a straight up race. In Micro SaaS, we can assume that we're pursuing a niche. So be weary of assuming like, oh man, we need like, 30% of revenue or of cost is going to be, towards marketing spend. We need to hire all these people. Be very, very hesitant to make that assumption. Secondly, it doesn't need to be the case that your product's feature set or technical superiority is just like off the charts. Like, you don't need to buy these absolutely spectacular products that are going to provide this kind of PLG growth lever for you. When you're catering to niches, you can provide very simple products that solve a very defined pain point for a very defined audience. And so the product can be basic. And don't sleep on just the product, right? Like, the objective is to establish kind of these like rabid communities of loyal users, which is a function of onboarding. It's a function of community engagement. It's a function of a whole bunch of stuff. So it's, the product is probably a third at most kind of the equation. So don't limit yourself to thinking like, the only way we're going to grow is through product, right? Be thoughtful about onboarding, be thoughtful about the communities that you build around your product and how your users interact and help each other. There's a lot of different levers that are at your disposal. And then lastly, we've kind of touched on this, but it's very rarely a land grab and land grabs require tremendous capital. So it's not like, okay, we need to raise all this money to grow this company. You don't. Like, you can grow it at a steady, healthy clip in a very profit focused manner. And time is a little bit more on your side, and you can iterate more thoughtfully, and you can use data to fine tune your go-to-market strategy and all that stuff. So this is, distinctly not venture. So just to summarize, be super careful about assuming that you need to ramp this huge sales team. You need to spend, 30 cents on the dollar for marketing. And also be very careful that you need to totally hang your hat on product to grow, because there's many other kind of ingredients in the recipe. And lastly, you don't need all this capital to fuel growth. Like, you can do it in a much more calculated, high probability way. So let's move on now to misconceptions about sales-led tactics. So holy shit. I remember in my day, I remember when email automation came out. And it was like, we know that you need to send a prospect 3 emails. We know that it needs to be personalized to a degree. So we're going to set up like we're going to create these email campaigns that are like 4 or 5 touches, because the first email doesn't get read. The second email gets glanced at. The third one, if we pique their interest, might get chewed on a little bit, but they're not going to really engage with us until 8, right? So now all of a sudden it's like, we need to send our prospects 8 emails. They need to be kind of thoughtfully sequenced and curated. And that led to the emergence of like Outreach, Sales Loft, which was like, cool, let's automate all of this. We have sales development reps that are pushing into the market. They're trying to create opportunities. We have our account executives that come in and work those opportunities and execute sales process, et cetera. So back in my day, it was like, here's my email sequence in a Google Doc. I'm going to copy and paste it. I'm going to personalize the first name. I'm going to go on their LinkedIn page and find something interesting to kind of break through the noise, because it is the case that I am speaking specifically to them, that I have real conviction around how whatever we're selling solves a pain point for them. That was just full on automated, totally automated, right? And so there was and then there's interesting stuff where you look at like marketing tech or sales tech landscapes. And over the last 5 years, right, the market has like quintupled in terms of participants. So it's totally saturated. There's point solutions for everything. It's just a very busy market. But the good news is that automation reduced the costs, right? So now an SDR can send 30,000 emails in a week before they could send, maybe 400 good ones in a week. And that reduced the customer acquisition costs, right? So very simply, labor goes into the cost that you pay, sales labor specifically goes into the cost that you pay to acquire users. So now all of a sudden that cost reduced because automation improved the efficiency at the unit level. The unfortunate part is that automation completely broke a lot of channels. Like your inbox is probably noisy as shit if you're a CEO or any type of kind of high profile job title at a company that is a fit for any software products. LinkedIn inboxes are almost completely broken now. They're just so noisy. But the bottom line is that sales-led tactics went from being like purely human-driven, just a function of time. Automation came in terms of scaling outreach in a very efficient way. And so that's changed kind of a lot of the baseline assumptions around sales-led tactics. But this is all very common, right? So I'm like getting us to like 2015, or like probably 2015 until now, right? Like there's been this kind of injection of automation and a decent level of personalization that has totally changed the assumptions around sales-led tactics, mainly as it relates to cost structure. Then analytics and data came into the equation where it's like, wow, now and I guess I'll just give you a sense, whereas before it was like, hey, let's send an email to this group because they have the same number of employees and they're in the industries that we like and they operate in the geographies we like, right? We've spoken a lot about firmographics. Cool. Now all of a sudden you're looking at like, hey, let's go after this profile because we just looked on their LinkedIn page and it looks like they're going on a hiring spree and they're hiring a Salesforce admin, which implies that they're with Salesforce and the thing that we sell bolts onto Salesforce. So now all of a sudden the targeting got much more precise and much more relevant. And the personalization got more relevant, right? Because again, we just got better at kind of pulling more surface area into things that can personalize emails as a function of automation. As of like the last year, and so all of those things push the labor cost down to execute traditional sales-led tactics, which those sales-led tactics have become traditionally the same, right? You got to send in, you got to talk to people, you got to get out into the market to get the message out, to build brand awareness, to educate the market at worst. At best, convince them that you're the right solution for whatever problem they're already aware that they have. Then comes along generative AI. And it's like, holy shit. Now we have a thing that sends automated emails. We have a thing that scrapes everything on the internet about the people that we're trying to send emails to. And we have a tool that actually generates cohesive and articulate messaging that is super personalized. So that then cuts the cost structure in half, at least. It totally changes the unit economics as it relates to cost structure in that vein. So that kind of brings us to today. And it's like, whoa, sales-led tactics are pretty cheap, right? Like you can scrape stuff to get leads for free. You can personalize it for an API call, which is pennies, and it doesn't cost any money to send emails. So now all of a sudden it's like, whoa, this is very interesting. We don't have to hire anybody the entire time. So Outbound is interesting, though. I think a lot of people, and I guess just to kind of bring this full circle, it was like, oh yeah, Outbound, that's like OG, sales stuff. That doesn't work. It's all about PLG now, or perhaps it's more about a blend of the two. But cold outbound is kind of taking a back seat. And if you're a founder of a micro SaaS firm, I just want to encourage you to rethink that stuff. And it's not, I think it's not like, ooh, and I think these things all exist and you need to be mindful of your context, but it's like, hey, we're going to get some content going so we rank higher on SEO. We're going to, embed some features in PLG or in the product that make it more shareable or that increase some virality. Make sure that cold outbound is on your mind and in part of the territory or the surface area when you're trying to think about levers and you're thinking about tactics, because it can do a lot of stuff. And so I guess just to articulate that more, cold outbound and to define this, and forgive me, I should have defined this earlier, but it's just contacting somebody via email, via social, via text, or whatever without their permission. So you hit them up and then they can opt out, of course. And there's a lot of regulation around that to avoid spam because, again, automation has kind of corrupted email. So all the email players are doing their best to kind of keep that stuff under, wrap parameters around it so that it's not quite as bad. But, when you're working in a highly defined niche or customer base, and exactly what the pain points are, you can target these users very explicitly based on the firmographics, based on other behaviors, based on triggers. you can deliver a highly valuable message to this audience, and you can do it via email, you can do it via social, whatever, however you want to think about social, and you can do it on the cheap. So those are all good things, right? Like if you add all those things up, it's like, whoa, this is pretty competitive to the other tactics that we might be considering. The other piece too is that, you can kind of control the throttle. So if you're publishing all this content and you're trying to play an inbound game, ultimately you're trying to rank higher for what is probably a pretty defined volume of search intent. And the job is to capture as much of that search intent as you can. But it's not coin operated, right? You publish 50 blog posts, it's not going to guarantee you get a 50% increase in your, or you percent. Sorry, let's back up. You publish 50% more blog posts, it's not going to guarantee that you're going to capture 50% more of that volume, right? Whereas with email, and this is what led to kind of the advent of our Mark Roberge and the sales acceleration formula and half the books on my shelf, which were gospel. With email, it's a little bit more predictable where there is a calculus, right? And you can establish benchmarks over time. So it's like, well, we know that if we send 1,000 emails, 100 will get a reply, 10 will convert to a trial, and 1 will convert to a new customer. So theoretically, it's like if you send 10,000 emails, you're going to acquire 10 customers. So we love everyone loves the predictable nature of that stuff. And again, we use the term coin operated, where it's like, I put a penny in here and I get $1 back, right? That's the holy grail in business, period, is being super clear on cause and effect tactics. With email, it's more in that vein where you can set the pace. You can start to predict outcomes based on base rates and conversions and stuff like that, which in my view is favorable to kind of an inbound thing where it's like, we're going to publish a bunch of content and just hope more people come knocking on our door. Lastly, with email, you have really clear kind of just cold outbound. Sorry, let me back up. I want to be a little more broad. You have really clear real-time visibility into performance. So there's a really tight feedback loop. So back to our example, the first campaign, you send 1,000 emails, maybe you A/B test a few emails, and it's like A performed way better. Cool, let's course correct and triple down on A. That's not quite as available in a lot of the other tactics. So you have a tight feedback loop where pattern recognition is very obvious, and you can course correct your efforts accordingly, which yet again is saucy. That's what we want. So I think the bottom line is, I'd hesitate to not have cold outbound, involved in your thought process. And I think it's our job as founders and operators to ensure that, like they say, ensure that all the surface area is considered, that there's a whole spectrum of outcomes or of possibilities, a spectrum of tactics that you're considering, and that you have an objective framework to kind of score and prioritize the tactic that makes the most sense in your context. And cold outbound is not a relic of the past. It's still relevant as shit. I think if anything, the generative AI revolution has made it way more interesting. And it's really a useful tactic in the context of Micro SaaS, where it's not spray and pray, right? Because we know that stuff doesn't work. It's highly targeted, highly personalized, and you're speaking to a very defined, user profile among a very defined segment. So dust off the cold outbound playbook. If you want one, we got one. And I hope that this was helpful, or at a minimum kind of got you to think about the different growth models and how they've evolved over time, and the tactics that you have, kind of in your toolkit. So with that, let's go ahead and wrap. For the love of the game, I'll see y'all next week. Thank you so much for riding with us. Cheers.